This is Ron McFarland from the Wrinkled-Brain Network, and today's topic is the Department of Defense DFARS auditing. It's an overview of the need and the training necessary to be a DFARS auditor. Now, just a little bit about me. I have a doctorate, PhD in computer technology from the School of Engineering and Computer Science at Nova Southeastern University in beautiful Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I also have a postdoc grad certificate in cybersecurity technology from University of Maryland, University College. 20 years of industry experience and quite a lot of teaching experience. I post information on wrinkledbrain.net, so that content's mine, and I'm also opening it up to others who wish to post content there. The focus of that website is, of course, cybersecurity, and with one particular focus, it's the DoD DFARS, which we'll briefly go through. Feel free to look at my LinkedIn profile or contact me, add me in LinkedIn, and that would be really nice. And here's what we're going to briefly go over today. Some of the topics. Who's the training for? Quite frankly, the training, just real quickly, could be for IT folks or somebody looking for a side gig. So we'll go into that in just a bit of detail. What's wrong? Manufacturers are compliant but breached. So there's some finagling going out there, as we all have seen. What's limited? There's a shortage of resources, so we'll touch bases on that. And what's moving forward? Addressing needs for manufacturers, especially in the DoD market space. So there's a lot of opportunity here, along with some of the drawbacks. Whenever we're looking for drawbacks, we can look for the opportunities, and that's what I hope to impart on this brief presentation. This is not too well scripted. I'm just moving forward as I do want to present this on a YouTube video pretty quickly. In addition, just so you know, later on I'll have a more polished version of this, perhaps using a better microphone as well. So who's the DoD DFARS training for? First off, we've got three basic target markets, and you could probably identify a few others too. And if you do, send me an email. I've listed my email at the very last slide of this presentation, and I'll also you can contact me through YouTube as well. First off, IT professionals working at manufacturing environments. For example, a lot of the manufacturers in the Los Angeles areas in particular may be pretty small or medium, and some of the manufacturers that may have, a dozen or a couple of dozen employees don't have a full fleshed out IT staff. They may contract some of it out, or they may have just one person running the whole show. Well, the DoD DFARS training is for that one person who might be running the whole show, or maybe a small group of 2 or 3 folks in the IT arena who need to do the compliance training in order to perform an audit. Now, the second bullet, skilled IT professionals looking for a viable side gig that pays quite well. Now, this is one that I'm particularly focused on as well, because one thing that's and my focus is coming out of some of the flyers that I've received as of late. I received recently, last week, a flyer that said special price, $17,999 for up to 100 hours of an audit. So that's $179 an hour, and that's quite a hefty price point. But I tell you, in looking around, many of the IT auditors that focus on DoD DFARS are charging typically around $250 an hour, and some may be up to, I found one person that's charging $850 an hour. So that there's quite a big demand for DoD DFARS auditing, which is driving up the prices. I'll chat about that in a second. Also, for entry-level IT professionals who want to start a consultancy, this may be something you might want to start looking into. Now, I have identified a path a little bit later on in this presentation that you might consider if you're an entry-level IT professional, or even if you're more skilled, you might want to consider some of the items noted on the path so you have a little more sure footing as you move forward with the DoD DFARS audit. Now, who's the DFARS training for? Basically, it's to address compliance that the Department of Defense is requiring for all of their contractors and subcontractors. Now, a couple of bullets here. We've all heard about the significant hacks by nation states. Nation states being like the like Iran, the state of Iran, or nation state of Iran, the country of Iran. I'm sorry, China, the nation state of China, the country of China, and other, North Korea and those sort of countries who are constantly attacking. The key point is the theft of intellectual property and government secrets. We'll chat a bit about that. Our government is in particular very concerned with the amount of hacks, the intellectual property stolen, the governmental secrets that have been taken. And just to give you an idea, I've noted the present scope. And I got this figure from Georgia Tech last week when I went on a conference call there. There's about 1 million DoD contracts floating around. Could you imagine managing 1 million contracts? And out of that, 60,000 suppliers and subcontractors are supporting those 1 million contracts. So that kind of infers that a lot of suppliers are working on multiple contracts. Now, the audits are now mandated for both primes and subprimes to maintain their DoD certifications. One thing that's kind of interesting that I've recently run into, the mandate went into effect last year, 2017, and the government was giving out a lot of extensions to manufacturers and subcontractors in terms of having the compliance documentation in. Well, the government is starting to lock down pretty hard on that, and a lot of the manufacturers are starting to receive compliance letters, and the extensions are not happening anymore. We'll talk a bit more about that in a second. This slide, compliant but breached. Now I want to emphasize a lot of the DoD contractors are compliant. They have correct policies and procedures in place, but just having policies and procedures doesn't always protect you. I use the analogy, for example, that you can build a 10-foot tall steel fence around your property, yet somebody, which makes it compliant, perhaps, following the rules, but somebody could dig a hole underneath that fence. So that compliant but breach, that would be one example. I use this example as something that still follows us around. In 2000, in Australia, a disgruntled person who didn't receive a governmental job actually hacked into the pumping station of the sewage plant and just allowed the sewage plant to be dumped into the river, creating what they call the Great Stink of 2000. Now that was 18 years ago, so but we still have that kind of issue still going on just because the way the internet was designed. And in a way, you can look at a plant facility like this, very similar to a manufacturing production environment where you have a lot of uh, perhaps Internet of Thing devices and other kind of controllers that maintain the whole plant. Of course, back in 2000, IoT wasn't prevalent as it is nowadays, but in today's manufacturing environment, that's a high risk factor. By the way, Department of Homeland Security about 4 years ago ran a test on a lot of the different city sewage and water facilities just to see what the potential hacks were. They stopped at 250,000 potential breaches. They didn't get through the entire test at all. They figured they had enough data to highlight that we need to secure those type of processing plants as well. So although the water and sewage isn't directly manufacturing, in some ways it's kind of related to it because a lot of the features and facilities are the same. So this is just an example of being compliant, which the sewage plant was, but also being hackable. Now, most folks that are listening to this video are already familiar with Stuxnet. Of course, Stuxnet was a combination of U.S. intelligence and Israeli intelligence designing a virus that really targeted the Siemens control systems around the spin up, spin down for the nuclear rods. And the slide here you can read on your own. Certainly I'll post all of this information as a PDF file for your reading pleasure later on. But needless to say, we've got this really effort of customized software that really is an attack vector for manufacturing plants. And if you look in terms of a nuclear plant as perhaps a manufacturing environment, we still have the nation state folks like China, Iran, North Korea defining and developing software that targets specific hardware platforms. So Night Dragon is another example of nation states. Now McAfee discovered the series of coordinated attacks on energy, manufacturing, and petrochemical companies in 2011. And in their investigation, they realized that not only did it originate from China, but it started 2 years prior. So those advanced persistent threats, APTs, are kind of little nefarious things that can happen in someone's system. So a person or a group of companies or an organization could be compliant but yet breached. And of course, with many of the Night Dragon hacks, a lot of data was exfiltrated. Large files containing customer information, intellectual property, and that sort of thing. So that's one of the predominant freakouts, if you will, that the Department of Defense is looking at the APT items. And the next slide identifies something a little more in particular. Here's kind of the tipping point for the Department of Defense. The F-35, all intellectual property, their designs were taken a few years back, a year and a half back. Well, maybe 2 years. I don't have the exact date. But bottom line is, you can see at the bottom of this slide, the J-31 was developed. It's kind of a new and improved. The DoD was hoping that the F-35 would give the U.S. a 12 to 20 year lead on technology. However, with this significant breach, all bets are off now. Matter of fact, I would say the J31 is probably an F35 plus. Also, in addition to that, this is only one example. Helicopters, tank designs, and that sort of thing have been stolen by other nation states. So, of course, DoD DFARS has put their foot down in terms of how contractors and subcontractors handle their data, which is part of the DFARS training that we'll go into a little bit later on. So this being kind of the key, the tipping point, the F35 is kind of highlighted and emphasized why the U.S. needs DoD DFARS standards and subsequent training. So one thing that we know, information assurance problem, hackers focus on beating security controls, while in contrast, a security and compliance team focus on adhering to laws and regulations. Now, by the use of putting controls in place, and one thing you can simply say is that a hacker needs to only have one point of entry, whereas security and compliance teams are trying to cover many points of entry, if you will. And the laws and regulations are their primary focus in lieu of what a hacker would look at is beating a particular security control. Now, if you look at the bottom right hand side, that actually is a Haas manufacturing environment, Haas being machine tools, if you will. And if you look at that, each one of those devices has one or many IP addresses. Hopefully they're each in a separate VLAN, which is another technology that would be audited, if you will. However, not only looking at that picture, if we can look back at some of the detail, industrial networks, we need to know how they operate. We need to know also what protocols, and we need to know where, why those protocols have been established. And even the why is pretty darn important, because we have a plethora of protocols we can choose from. Part of the auditing process goes through that. So if someone's a little bit weak on that, I do have a slide that shows what you can do to strengthen up your knowledge base on the technologies. Now, industrial network controls are generally designed to be both efficient and reliable, and perform in an economic sense in terms of cranking out the materials needed. They're not necessarily designed for security, and I say not necessarily because more and more manufacturers are starting to put a little more emphasis on that. Security also tends to slow down things a bit, perhaps, if it's poorly done, or if it's not a main focus of a particular item that's in the production line. Now, from the hacker's perspective, if we think of IoT, IoT often now is not based on a security platform. I'll say that in general terms. A lot of the IoT devices are slapped together, put out to market without security first. The cost factor is the primary concern of an IoT manufacturer in general. So imagine a manufacturing environment where plenty of IoT devices are deployed that may not have robust security, or may be implemented in a way that provides an exposure to that company. Those need to be identified in an audit, and also a plan of action needs to be designed in order to secure those environments. To complicate matters, many of the protocols have been modified over Ethernet and Internet Protocol networks. Now, as we will discuss in the DoD DFARS training, IP was never intended to be a secure protocol at the onset. We're starting to, and I say we're starting to, it's been 15, 20 years that we've been patching the IP, IPv4, IPv6, which is a little more secure, still has significant security flaws as well. So each of those is really now the backbone of most manufacturing environments. So that's a big risk factor and exposure to attack. I've listed common attack vectors, ways that attackers can get in. That includes phishing, malware, malicious mobile apps, which are more prevalent in the manufacturing environment. The average person has somewhere between 3 and 4 mobile devices, and that's going to increase as IoT and other devices become more prevalent. Smishing as well, that's SMS texting, if you will, smishing. Physical security threats are another area that many in the cybersecurity area sort of turn a blind eye to, but that's a really key factor. And of course, insecure networks, we'll mention that over and over in the training sessions. Now, from the hacker's perspective, up on the right-hand corner here, I've listed a couple of items. There's plenty of freely available tools. We'll list those a little bit later in subsequent training. There's many known vulnerabilities. Those are published and available to hackers. And the publication of those vulnerabilities are intended to help the sysadmin correct those vulnerabilities. Yet a hacker can look at those vulnerabilities and attempt to exploit those networks that haven't been patched or fixed yet. Also, dark web postings, there's plenty of that going on. You can get on a lot of dark web sites, and we'll discuss some of that and look for other security holes that are known vulnerabilities and some that are not. I like using this particular presentation. If you look under Norse, this gives you Norse online. If you go out to a browser and key Norse in and look up network attacks, this gives you kind of an interactive display of attack environments, if you will. You can see attacks going. Here's one attack going on from, it looks like Seattle to, I don't know if it's somewhere up in the northeast, but this map usually lights up quite a bit. And by the way, Norse only looks at malformed packets and some other kind of odd situations that are going on, and it's not a full and complete look at the attacks that are going on, but it gives you a representative sample. If you look online for Norse and type in Norse attack map, you'll get this interactive screen, and it'll show some lighting up of attacks that are possible, that are going on. It's good for a conversation, and once in a while I'll throw it up on the office screen, so when customers, clients do walk in, they'll see activity going on, and they'll usually point to it and say, "What's that about?" And I'll explain some of the potential attacks that are going on between countries or within countries. Now, what IT really hopes to do is lock everything up. That's the ideal situation. But you know, users just don't like that for some reason. So the true goal of IT is to, I found this, I thought this was kind of interesting. This is a graphic that I found on the web. and a balance between being secure and providing a good user experience. So that's what the key is for IT, to balance those two, security and a good user experience. And we all love this cartoon by Scott Adams. Starting today, all passwords must contain letters, numbers, doodles, sign language, and squirrel noises. Kind of getting to the point that sometimes cybersecurity is looked at as kind of an easy fix, if you will, but yet one notion is that I've heard cybersecurity mentioned as only one or two courses. It's a whole series of coursework, a very integrated approach. Matter of fact, NIST, the governmental agency that provides standards, um, suggests that there are 17 areas of cybersecurity, and that's probably not covering all of them. For example, some of the 17 areas, certainly one of them is networking security, another area is secure programming, a third area is logistics, shipping things back and forth, and it goes on and on from there. So cybersecurity ends up being a large umbrella discipline. Now, here's kind of the trajectory of where the DoD DFARS originated. I listed these: DHS, Department of Homeland Security, provides direction to NIST, and NIST has developed two large documents. The 853A, that's securing governmental systems. So if you are in the government, this very large document contains hundreds of remediation to governmental systems that can be done and should be done in order to harden systems. And it's still not a complete document, even though it's probably 500 pages long or more. From that was derived the next item, the 800-171. And that smaller document, maybe about the third of the size of the 53A, has a couple hundred remediations to tighten up cybersecurity. That's intended on manufacturers and subcontractors. Now, one other document I don't have in here, which we will go over in the training, is called the MEP document, and that's a subset, essentially the forms that are required to complete and submit for each governmental contract. DFARS ultimately provides the certifications for manufacturers through the compliance audit. I always say that the compliance audit is very much like doing your annual taxes. And in a way it is. If you're a tax preparer, you'll go to a client, for example, and you'll ask the client for their W-2s and other kind of supporting documents. You'll fill out the tax paperwork. The client signs and sends that tax documentation into the IRS. In a similar fashion, an auditor will go to a client site and request certain documents. You won't be penetration testing or doing anything like that, but you'll be requesting documents and other types of parameters in order to fill out the MEP documentation that ultimately the contractor, the vendor, the supplier will sign off and submit as a compliance audit. That's kind of the essence of the compliance audit. Now, one of the things that's really created demand for the audit also focuses around this. There's limited funding. Manufacturers are on a tight budget, and they're working on a tight margin. For example, they can't hire typically another employee to do the DoD audits. That's why I mentioned that this is a potentially good side hustle for folks that are experienced in IT and perhaps even IT cybersecurity to do. So there's limited funding in manufacturers. There's limited human resources, and I think this is what's driving up the prices. There's a shortage in cybersecurity space. I just saw an item today from ISC Squared, and ISC Squared is the organization that does the CISSP certification. That's the big dog cybersecurity certification. And they mentioned that the shortage has now of IT cybersecurity professionals has now reached 3 million. So there's a vast shortage, which drives up the price when manufacturers are looking for someone to complete their DoD DFARS audit. That's a good thing and kind of a bad thing for the manufacturers. They're still working on a margin. We want to be sensitive to what their needs are if you're going to do this as a side hustle. There's also limited and expensive training opportunities in just the DoD DFARS. Now, if you go out and look at DoD DFARS training, you'll find 2, 3, 4-day courses on the DFARS training, and I've seen price tags anywhere from $1,500 to, actually, I saw one that was $6,000. So a lot of trainers are getting into the space, and I think overcharging for what the training really is. But what do you need to do as a DFARS auditor? I've listed a couple of things here. First off, you need a general understanding of the manufacturing process. Now, that would be ideal but not required. I think that would be a little more emphasis on ideal plus, almost leaning into required. You have to kind of know, and certainly you can read up on what the manufacturing process is. That's something that we won't go over in any kind of training that we do. Now, second bullet, some sort of training or background in IT. Training, whether it's formal education or many certs, or if you've worked in IT for a number of years, you probably have sufficient background to do this type of work. Number 3, some sort of equivalent experience with security, cybersecurity. And this is what I've listed in terms. You may come up, matter of fact, if you've come up with other ideas to support a well-rounded cybersecurity training, drop me an email. But this is the essence. If you have Network Plus and Security Plus certification, which is from CompTIA, Cisco Cyber Ops certification, maybe even the Cisco CCNA as well to support that. Some sort of penetration testing, whether it's from CompTIA or many other providers. Perhaps the Certified Ethical Hacking Cert, and that's from EC Council, or any other level of training that supports your understanding of information security and the cybersecurity process. Now, there's no strict requirement for a DoD auditor to have any of these trainings under belt. But in order to do a good job for the manufacturer, basically repeat business if you're doing contracting, or if to have a really solid report to the federal government, you'll want some of this background in your pocket. So that's my recommendation. My recommendation further on number 4, I've listed a path: A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus, or Pen Test, and those are from CompTIA. Matter of fact, you can go to a community college and get those pretty cheaply. If you go to a private vendor for those type of coursework, that coursework, it could be a couple of $1,000s, but that's something that you would have to decide. Basically, time versus money situation there. The second item is A+, and the Certified Ethical Hacker. That would be a shorter path. Or the longest path, and there's a lot of variations in between, the CISSP. Now, the CISSP requires at least 5 years of security experience anyway, so you'll have ample experience if you already have the CISSP. Now, the DoD DFARS training is on top of all of this. Private auditing companies, as I mentioned, are charging upward of $1,500, but I've seen it up to like $6,000 for a 5-day session of the same content. Some providers are relatively inexpensive. I know Georgia Tech offers some training that's reasonably priced as one, but I think they're in the couple $100 range. The study on your own, now I'll provide a list of self-study items on my website. I posted early 2019. I still have, because I'm working full-time, I am doing some of this as a side gig. I have to stretch that out to early 2019. And a Udemy course. I'm developing a low-cost option that will be in early 2019. And I'll post, quite frankly, some of that video content as well on the Wrinkled-Brain Net website. So, and also hopefully with better production quality. I'm just ripping this presentation out quickly so you have the information right now. Oh, again, just kind of a recap. Additional training will be on the Wrinkled-Brain Network site, www.wrinkledbrain.net, and also Udemy early 2019. I am glad to do customized in-person training. Drop me a note at ronmcfarland@wrinkledbrain.net, and if, contact me as well on the Wrinkled-Brain Network. So here's my email address. I had it incorrect on the one slide. I put this slide presentation together pretty promptly, and so I wanted to get this information out to not only the YouTube community, but also the Wrinkled-Brain Network community as well. So any questions, drop me an email. Any comments, suggestions, drop me an email as well. Look for content on Wrinkled-Brain.net. I'll also post the Udemy course once that's all developed and produced, and I'll use a decent microphone on that one too. So I anticipate the training online materials will be roughly 8 to 10 hours worth of content, maybe more, but I've got it mapped out to be 8 to 10 hours worth of content. In-class training usually runs about 16 hours, 2 full days, because there's some exercises and discussion as well. So drop me a note should you have any other questions. Again, this is good for the IT professional who needs to do this for their small to medium manufacturer, or somebody who's an IT professional who is looking to do a side gig, which you'll be well compensated. We'll talk about compensation levels in the course as well, and what the deliverables are as a responsible contractor to the manufacturer, because you want to not only do a great service to the manufacturer, but you want a repeat customer who values and trusts your experience as an IT cybersecurity professional who's handling the DoD DFARS. So that's it for today. Me signing off, and I will chat with you soon. Drop me a note if you have any questions.